everyone, and welcome to the Ottawa Valley Mom Show. This is a really special episode because we have a guest with us. A few weeks ago, or probably about a month ago now, on the blog, we posted a TED Talk video on domestic violence survivors and why victims of domestic violence don't often leave. That's a question that a lot of people, I guess, ask domestic violence victims, is why don't they leave? And when we posted that video, it got, there was some great conversation around it, and Anne came forward and offered to talk about her own experience with abuse and being a survivor, and we're so grateful that you were willing to do that. And I mean, I know how much it's a challenging thing to talk about and revisit, that part in your life. So we're really happy that you decided to do that. And so we're going to have a conversation around it and talk a little bit about Anne's experience and anything that Anne can maybe talk about that might help anyone out there that's dealing with something similar.
So I met my ex-husband 1999. So this year will be 10 years that I've been divorced. And when we were talking earlier, both of you said, wow, we didn't even realize you had been married before or divorced or any of this had happened. And I think part of that is because I've taken this segment that's happened in my life and kind of moved past it. I'm in a happy place now. Things are good in my life. So I've moved past all of this. So to talk about this, I went through tons and tons of journals back when I was going through this. And it's amazing to me now to see all the warning signs were there. The yelling, the grabbing, punching holes in the wall, just biting, and the name calling. And a lot of it is controlling too. And a lot of people don't realize that that is a form of abuse. But when someone is monitoring who you see, where you go, what hours you work, how much money you're putting into the household income, and when you're working and putting more in than he is, then that's a form of abuse too.
Yeah.
And looking back on all of it, I was like, wow, this is crazy. I can't believe I didn't leave earlier than what I did. But there is a lot, like you said, there is a lot of reasons why people don't leave when they're in an abusive situation. Sometimes the main one is a lot of times we remember that one or two good times in our life where it was happy, and we want that back. And you blame yourself, and you're trying to figure out, how can I get that back? And especially as a woman, I feel like we try to fix the situation a lot. So, we're trying to make sure that our relationship is happy and it's good. And if you come from kind of the background that when you get married, you're married for life, you have that pressure on you.
Yeah.
You put that pressure on yourself, like, okay, I'm engaged now, we're going to get married, we have to make this work.
So, go ahead.
I was going to say, when you met your ex-husband, what was he like when you met him? Because I know when we were talking earlier, you said like even a month into your relationship, there was signs that you were ignoring or you didn't choose to kind of see then. So
when I first met him, very, very attention-seeking. And I see that now looking back on it. But, he was very exuberant. We were going out a lot because just the nature of the work that we did. We went out with friends a lot, so you don't necessarily see those bad behaviors. There was signs of it. I had a friend of mine pull me aside and say, you might want to just reconsider this. This was a guy I was friends with because he punched a phone booth downtown when we were all out the other day, and glass shattered everywhere, and I was like, oh. But love is very, very blind. Yeah. Very blind. And I just kind of went, oh yeah, it must have been a rough night or whatever. And, there was another time where he grabbed my shirt and screamed in my face. It was just about the dog, and I put it down to just being a bad day, and he apologized. And the very core of abuse is they do something, then they apologize, and then they make up for it. So it's that vicious circle that you get caught up into, like, okay, there was this bad moment, but then it got better, and then we made up. But what it really is it's a roller coaster, and you're constantly thinking that, okay, what kind of day is it going to be like?
Yeah, like walking around on eggshells almost.
So he would come home from work, and I would be like, okay, what kind of mood is he in? Because when he walks in the door, you're like, is it going to be a good day or a bad day? So for sure there was definitely signs before we even got married. But they also, stats show that the moment you get married, that gives them permission to increase the abuse. So when things got worse was after we were married.
And how long were you guys together before you got engaged and then got married?
So we met through work October 1999, and then we were married June 2001. So-
yeah.
Yeah, and then we were separated by May 2003. So we were married less than 2 years. And then when I was separated, or when I asked for a separation, even that was very, very difficult. And I think one of the things that people have to realize is that when you're in an abusive situation, it's very, very difficult to just leave. You have to have safety plans in effect, and you become an actress. You know, like we were getting separated, and he would say, well, I'm getting this other house to live in, but maybe we'll use it as income property if we get back together. And I was like, oh yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
you're like, what are you supposed to say? Oh no, I'm never going to look at you again. I never want to talk to you again. You can't do that because you're in that situation. So you have to be very much like that.
And so when you were both married, and you know, and going through that whole stage of your relationship, did you find that the abuse progressed to a point where that's what led you to asking for the separation, or?
It did. It progressed a lot. At one point too, I was working at a place that had a lending library, so there was all these research books on a bookcase that they lent out to people, and one of them was verbal abuse, are you a victim of it? And I picked it up and I started leafing through it, and they had a checklist in it, and I matched almost every single thing that was checked off. You know, if you've ever felt intimidated, if you've ever felt controlled, and there was like everything, if you ever had name calling. And one of the things he used to do was once he took a glass and crushed it in front of me, and there was blood on his hands, and I was on my way to meet a friend of mine in Orleans, and I lived in Westboro. We had an apartment there, and he got in his car and chased me from Westboro to Orleans so that I couldn't meet up with my friend. And when I pulled into the parking lot at Plaza Orleans, he got out and was screaming at me so that I couldn't even go to my friend's house because I was afraid of the confrontation.
Right.
But again, that's a form of intimidation. Neither of you have a partner, none of us do right now, that would stand there and crush a glass in front of your face, like, this is what I can do to you, or punching a hole in the wall and saying, this is what I can do to you. He also had a gun, and that he used to use it as target practice. He was training to be a police officer. And once I started going to counseling, the counselor said you have to have safety plans in effect. You have to be aware of all your movements. You have to know what kind of weapons are in your house. And they're very, very honest with you and very blunt. And she said, if you have a weapon in your house, you are asking for more trouble because it's there, it's available.
Yeah.
And so she had requested that I turn it into the police station, which I did. I went to the police station and turned it in. And they asked me at the time if I wanted to press any charges, and I said no. And they asked if I wanted to speak with an intake worker, and I said no. Because I knew what the ramifications would be if I had that involved. But at the same time, I had to go home to a husband and explain to him that I turned his gun in at the police station.
Right.
And it was terrifying. I remember going home and taking all the knives out of the house and putting them in the garage and hiding them, because I was like, I'm so afraid of telling you that. But he was also already at that point, I mean, we were married, taking the gun and waving it around his head and my head. It wasn't loaded, the bullets were in the case still, but what would have the next step been?
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, they say that every 6 days a woman in Canada is murdered by her boyfriend or husband. And that's, you know, you can see that.
Well, it's gotta be scary for you, like, I mean, now reading that, knowing that had you not left, that statistic could be you. Really. That's, I
And
know
it does
that's
get
goosebumps
worse.
right now.
It does start with the controlling, it does start with verbal abuse, and then it gradually gets worse. On the day of my wedding, if you look close enough at my wedding photos, there's bruises on my arms. There's like a ring of fingerprints on one arm. I can't remember which arm it is, but you know, even going back through that, because I don't even have And there was one wedding photo I even found in all my stuff because I didn't keep any of that. I had journals, but you know, we did tons and tons of counseling. So in the course of the time between when we were married and when we were separated, we saw about 9 counselors, give or take. Some of them were good, some of them weren't so good. One of the counselors we had laughed because I said, "Oh, was that the time that you bit me?" And it wasn't a funny moment, and she laughed, and I was like, okay, this isn't a good situation. And right now, if you were with an abusive partner and you went to get counseling, they wouldn't counsel you because the situation is so tense at your house that if I turned to you in a counseling session and said, you know, Crystal, it really bothers me when you punch a hole in the wall because I feel intimidated.
Yeah.
What would end up happening is I would go home and potentially be beaten up or more abused.
Yeah.
So they won't counsel somebody who's being abused in that kind of situation. I mean, I think in a lot of aspects, counseling is great. But in that kind of situation, you really need to separate and get help separately.
Yeah.
One of the places I went to was Parkdale Family Services, and they did group therapy for women who had been abused.
Mm-hmm.
And there's all kinds. I mean, you have some women sitting beside you that are living at a shelter with their children, and you have somebody else beside you who is a lawyer and is trying to work through if she's going to leave her husband or not. And then there was another counseling group too I went to that was Catholic Family Services, and it was just for women, and each week they covered a theme. So they would cover verbal abuse one week, they would cover sexual abuse another week, and just different, are you experiencing this now? What is your experience with it? How can we help you through it?
Mm-hmm.
So they were good too. From the men's point of view, there is a group called New Directions in Ottawa, and most of the men who attend it, I believe 85% of the men who attend that are mandated by law to go through it. So if they are sentenced in court for being abusive or have major anger issues, they'll be mandated to do the New Directions course. You can also take this course though too, if you voluntarily go in and do it. You do have to pay to do it, but it's on a sliding scale, I believe. And every week it's the same kind of thing. It's a 12-week or a certain week program, and each week they cover stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So at the time, my ex-husband did that course, and he was given homework sheets, and every homework sheet would start off with, "She said this." And that's what precipitated the abuse. And then they would write in red, well, no, what did you do as well?
Yeah.
And it was very, very interesting to see their point compared to his point, because his point was, well, she started it.
He wouldn't take any of the ownership of anything.
He wouldn't take the responsibility for anything. So it was interesting seeing that aspect of it too. So we did do a lot of counseling. And at one point or another, the last counselor we saw was a guy, and I remember sitting in the counselor's office, and he said, okay, at this point in time, I think we're just going to focus on my ex-husband's issues with his family and his need for emotional support and everything else. And I turned and said, no, I'm done. At that point in time, I knew I was done with counseling. I wasn't doing this anymore. I didn't want to go to another single counselor to be like analyzed over.
Yeah.
And I also knew in my heart of hearts that I was done with the relationship. That, you know, we had done everything we could, and I was okay with the fact that we were done. So at that point in time, I asked for a separation.
So going through all of this, did you still feel like you loved him? Or was it that you were just afraid to leave? Or what were you feeling through all of that?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think halfway through it, I stopped loving him, probably about a year into it, because when you're abused over and over and over again, it's really hard to stay focused on the positives. The main reasons for staying, I think, is that whole need of, well, it's got to get better. You know, at some point or another, we're doing all this counseling. At some point, it's just got to get better. And there's also, as a woman or as anybody, you're like, what am I doing wrong? How can I make the relationship better? How can we work together better on this? And that wasn't working. And then the other reason was that pressure of marriage. You know, I didn't want to get divorced. I didn't want to be a stat. And I know the stats for divorce are super high. We had also gone ahead and bought a house. We had a car together. We didn't have children, so I mean that obviously is an added bonus. But there's the financial thing too. You know, we bought a house, we had a car together. So how do you leave somebody when you are used to sharing the income so much? There's a lot of reasons why you don't just pick up and leave.
Yeah.
I have friends that would leave a spare key at the back of their house so that I could go sleep at their house if I had problems. And I did do that. I mean, I had friends that worked shift work. I would go over to their house, pick up the key, go sleep at their house just so that I could have a safe place to sleep after we had a fight or, you know, I was afraid. But, you know, the biggest question that people always ask is, why didn't you leave? Or why didn't you leave sooner? And I really think, as society, that you should be saying, what can I do to help you? Like, what can I do to be there for you more? Do you want me to take you to a support group? Or do you want me to, you know, take you out for dinner? Do you want a spare key at the house? That would be more beneficial than, because it's almost like an accusation. Well, why didn't you leave?
Yeah.
And they just assume it's easy, you know, like, and it's not.
No. It's easier for people on the outside to just criticize or judge.
Yeah.
Well, exactly, because like you said, they don't have everything. They're not emotionally, financially wrapped up in it. It's simply, you know, able to be on the outside saying, well, you know, walk away. But I mean, you could say that about any situation. It's not easy to just walk away.
No, and I mean, even when you finally make that decision, okay, I'm done. I'm done. We're not going to stay together anymore, and I want a separation. It's hard. I mean, it's easy to say walk away, but you still have all your finances tied together, and somehow you have to separate them all without getting abused even more. And you have to make sure that you're not going to anger him even more. There were times, like even after we separated and he moved out, he would call and say, okay, I'm going to the house to pick up stuff. And I'd be like, well, you can't just do that. And I would have to drop everything at work, rush home so that he didn't clear out the whole entire house of stuff. Or he would say, well, I'm coming to the house because I'm picking up your engagement ring. And I went, you can't just do that. Like, you can't just walk into my house. Well, I didn't know you were so attached to your engagement ring. Well, I'm not. But it's still, you're still, you know, you're constantly doing that. So, you know, I'm not saying that you shouldn't leave. I'm just saying you have to have almost all your eggs in your basket. You have to have that support there behind you. And I did have support, but my parents didn't know a lot of what was going on. I think I was afraid of telling them how bad it really was. And even to this day, if I talk about it, my dad, like, he gets emotional. So I think it's really hard for parents to see their child, you know, in such a bad situation.
Well, exactly, and as moms, we know we would never want that
No, we wouldn't.
for our children, you know, and especially dads and their daughters, you know. We all have dads.
Yeah.
You know, we all know. My dad has always said that, you know, his motto was always to every guy that came into our life. He always said, you know, which is not a great thing to say, but he'd always say, you hurt her, I hurt you, you know, always. And he always said that, and he was very adamant about that. So it would be very difficult to come to your father and have to, you know, share that information and for him to know that you went through that experience. And there's probably guilt on his side that he wasn't able to save you earlier. You know what I mean?
I think there's that, but in that kind of situation, you have to save yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, you can have everybody in the world saying, "Aaron, get out. Crystal, get out."
Yeah.
You know, you're in a bad situation, and you defend that person. This is your husband at the time, and you defend them, and you're so used to defending them that you just kind of, I almost want to say, you get in that rut of saying, "Oh well, it's not so big." You minimize it because you know that you live in that situation, so you're so used to being like, yeah, you know, we went for a drive and he slammed on his brakes and threw the car keys out the window and I walked home, or you just get so used to everything, you know. And looking back on so much of it now, I mean, I'm a bridesmaid at my girlfriend's wedding at, you know, at the NEC, and I remember getting in a fight and having to leave the wedding early. And you can't do that when you're in a wedding party, but I had to. And we walked from NEC all the way back to Westboro, which isn't the easiest in high heels either, and you're in a formal dress. And he was across the street screaming at me, "I'm going to rip your gown, you're going to have to walk home naked." And, you know, you look back on all of this and you're like, oh my God. And then looking back and saying, I felt so bad for my best friend who I just, left her wedding and tried not to make a scene there. But I mean, all of it's there, right?
So what happened when you decided that you were done and you were leaving? Like, how did he react? Did he get more, like, abusive and, like, worse? Or was he like, no, Anne, please don't go, I'll change, that kind of thing? Or did he just kind of walk away from it?
No, he wanted us to keep working on it, and I think I just downplayed it a lot. I think this is the best thing to do. I think we should separate just for a bit, just to free the air and, see what happens. He moved in with a bunch of guys for a little while, and then he eventually bought a townhouse on his own, and then he said, maybe we can use this house as income property if we get back together. And I was like, yeah. You have to kind of be that actress, because if you don't, you're going to face more abuse.
Mm-hmm.
Even though he wasn't living with me and we were separated, I had to go through the motions of, yep, you're right, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
But we still had to go see a lawyer to separate the house deed, and we still had to sell the car because it was in both of our names. So there were still times we had to be in the same area with each other. So it's not as cut and dry.
So if you're tuning in right on Ottawa Valley Moms, please feel free to leave any comments that you have in the comments box below. If there's something that you'd like to share with Anne but you don't necessarily want to do so publicly, you can also send us an email to support@ottawavalleymoms.com, and we'll make sure that gets to Anne. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter, Ottawa Valley Moms. Just do a little search on both. And anything else we need to?
I think that's good.
All right. Well, thanks for watching, and we'll see you all next time. Bye.